Good morning. Hey, I'm so glad to be here today. My name is Pastor Sawyer Harlow, and my family and I get to be here with you, lovely people of Austin Youngstown, somewhere in between there, right? It's probably all the one and the same. But we're so blessed to be here with you today, filling in for Pastor Nate. And Pastor Nate and I are very good friends. He's a very dear friend to me, and we've been able to do ministry together over the last several years. And I just want you to know you have a pastor who loves you, and you have a pastor who wants to see the community changed with the love of Jesus. If you haven't gotten that already, maybe my outside perspective will help you know that's who he is. And so hopefully you all will join him in that. And I know over the last couple of weeks, however many times, you guys have been in this series called. And so we're continuing that series today. Just a little bit about me, though, before we get in. I don't want to just jump in without you like, who's this guy? But yeah, my name is Pastor Sawyer, and what I love about being here, you guys have Pastor Nate. So I always have to kind of explain myself. I'm a little bit excited. I get a little excited, but I don't have to explain myself here. You guys know what I mean, right? Pastor Nate does the same thing. So I don't have to explain myself. I'm excited about God. I'm excited about the church, the local church. I'm excited about people who want to restore hope to their communities and love well. So I'm excited all the time. So if I start talking too fast, maybe you can just go back and watch us later on a slower speed. I don't know. Maybe you do that already with Pastor Nate's sermons. But so we actually are, my family and I are actually in Logan, Ohio. If you don't know where that is, that's about an hour southeast of Columbus in the beautiful Hocking Hills. We're the home of the Hocking Hills. If you've never been there, you should definitely come see us. I think it's one of the most beautiful parts of Ohio. You should come check us out and see me while you're there. Come and say hey. But it's a great place, and my wife and I have been there for about 3 years now, and we actually we wanted to help you guys out. In the summer, sometimes can be difficult attendance-wise. So I told Pastor Nate, you know what? We're going to really help you out with your kids' ministry numbers. I'm going to bring all 5 of my kids today. So that's what we did. So I see that spike in your attendance charts, but yeah, that's us. So we have 5 kids, 9 all the way down to almost 2, and so we have a fun household, a messy household, a crazy household, but it's great. And yeah, like I said, we're excited to be here. I'm excited to dig in to this with you today. And I believe that God has a word for you, not from me, but from him. I just for some reason get to give it to you. And so we're going to be talking about David. Over the last couple of weeks, you guys have maybe brought this on, talked about David. I think last week might have been the first week. And you talked about David being called, and we're going to continue that story today. And really, this story, the story of David being called, is kind of an unexpected story all the whole way through. And I'm kind of a Bible nerd, so I like to really dig deep into things. I like to discover new things. Maybe you're that way too. So hopefully you'll appreciate some of this today. But have you ever gotten into something and realized that it was not at all what you've expected? Maybe a home renovation project that you jumped into and realized, oh, I'm going to have to redo the entire subfloor, right? Not just put some new carpet on, right? Like maybe you get into the weeds and you realize there's bees. We've done that recently. Right? You ever gotten into a situation where you thought, okay, we're going to do this. I have the plan, and then it doesn't go according to plan? Yeah, I think we all have, but probably the worst case scenario. I debated on telling this story just because of my own trauma. I don't like talking about this, but I wanted to surprise Kayla, my wife, my lovely wife sitting over there, Kayla. I wanted to surprise her for our wedding anniversary a few years ago and book a trip to the beach all by ourselves, right? At that point, we had 4 kids. And so I thought this would be great to get away. I'm going to surprise you. I knew because we have a Christ-centered marriage. I talked about the money. I didn't just make it. I just didn't just write the check and go. But she knew I was going to take her somewhere. She just didn't know where. But then when we got there, I wished that we had gone somewhere else. So we went to Virginia Beach. It was our first time there. So we're like, let's do Virginia Beach. It'll be cool. It'll be fun. We can drive there. It's not that far. And I booked a hotel. And this hotel you ever see something in the pictures and you're like, oh, that looks really nice. And then you see it in person. You're like, not so nice. They did a lot of editing on that thing. There's a lot of edits. Yeah. That's what happened because this hotel looked great. Now, this was in 2021. Pandemic protocol was all still happening. And so I guess I didn't take that into account, but everything set aside. We got free Wi-Fi. We got free breakfast. We got a pool. We got a hot tub. What more could you want, right? You could just hang out there. Well, when we got there, it kind of didn't look like anybody was there, so I didn't know if we were there or not. But then when we drove around and we saw the pool, the water was green because it hadn't been used since summer of 2019. And then we got into the place, and they said, hey, just so you know, we're not doing breakfast right now because of COVID. I'm like, man, now we got to spend money on breakfast. And then we get to our room, and it smelled horrible, right? It was like we requested a non-smoking room, and we got, I don't know, like a 1999 bar room. That's what it smelled like. And so, like, it was so bad. And then we saw some questionable red stains on the pillows. I don't know what they are. You can connect the dots there, see what that is. Hopefully it's nail polish, but you never know. And we saw, the chairs were broken. The bed was it was the worst situation we've ever been in. But because I paid for it, we stayed the whole time. And it was, but it was one of those situations where we got into something and we thought, this is not at all, at least I thought, not at all what I expected. It's definitely not what my wife expected. She thought she was going to be whisked away to some, beach paradise, and she got something that would come out of a NCIS show, murder scene. It was horrible. And so I say all that to say we all have times in our lives where things just didn't go the way we thought they were going to go. And I guess I'll spoil some of this. Maybe you talked about it last week too, but you are all called to something, right? God has called us all. He called us all, right? When he rose from the dead, he called us all to rise with him. And so he called us to something. We're called to, you have a purpose. You're called to something, and maybe you're in the process of figuring that out. Maybe you've known what that is, and you spent your time, a long time, many years doing that calling, and now maybe you're in a new season of life where you kind of got to rediscover a calling again, or you have to figure out what life looks like post-retirement, or with the kids out of the house, or with some sort of new normal, and the calling that God has placed on your life is going to look different than it has before. And today we're doing that. We're talking about that really through this question of what am I called to really? What am I called to really? Because so many times we can tie our calling to specific jobs and tasks and vocations, but then when those go away, it's sort of like we have like an identity crisis. We don't know who we are. We don't know we don't know how to carry on without whatever it was we were doing that we were called to, because we're called to things, right? We're called to do some specific thing or do a specific task. But when that task goes away, what are we doing? How do we reimagine our calling? So what am I really called to? And so this whole series is talking about David and his calling. We know he was called to be king, right? Samuel anointed him to be king, came to his house, was looking for the next king, and anointed the shepherd boy who nobody else would have thought would have been the king, but he's the king. And so he's anointed as the king, and he's waiting his turn, right? He's waiting his time. And so in this moment we're going to jump into, he faces something big, someone big, right? We're going to talk about one of the most famous Bible stories of all time in David and Goliath. It's found in 1 Samuel chapter 17. If you have a Bible, you can start heading there. But this story is often told as an underdog story. Like, the little guy does the impossible thing, that kind of story. This little dude does the seemingly impossible. And then what happens is, when you hear this story preached, and many of you have heard it preached many times, it becomes this story of facing your giants. And what is your giant? And how do you face your fear? And God is with you, so you can face your fear and you can do the thing. And but can I challenge you today? I think I can, because I get to go home after this. You never have to see me again. So if you hate this, just tough it out for a few minutes. Count sheep in your head while you sleep. Something. But I'm going to try to challenge you a little bit today on this story that you know so well. You guys remember the Sunday school days with the felt boards, right? And the little characters. Man, sometimes I miss those. But sometimes they give a picture of a story that's not the full thing. And so this story can sometimes be reduced. This David and Goliath story can be reduced to a mere underdog story. The little guy defeats the odds and beats the big guy. Yay, we can do it too. But I want to tell you that sells this story short. There's more to it than that, and there's more power in it than that. And so we're going to dive into that today. This story is told in a specific way. I'm hoping we can unpack it a little bit. So it's like 50 verses or something crazy in chapter 17. We're not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to kind of give you some highlights of what's going on and just kind of refresh your memory, and then we'll look at some specific scriptures. So again, you see Samuel anoints David in chapter 16. He anoints David, and then there's this war brewing between the Israelites and the Philistines. And so they all start to assemble their armies and gather for war. And Jesse, David's father, sends his 8 sons to war. Now, David is in the service of the king, but he's too young and not trained enough to fight yet. He's not a soldier, but he's in the service, so he gets to help out. And so Jesse told David to take supplies to the men at war. He's taking food and grain and things like that. If you're a VeggieTales person, you remember he's taking pizzas? Remember that? You should watch that later. It's like, that's not how it happened, but they're also vegetables, so whatever. But so David's taking supplies to the army, and he gets distracted by this conflict happening. David finds a circumstance that he did not expect. He's going into war. He expected, I would imagine, war and warriors getting ready to do war things, right? And so what he got was something completely different. The Philistines brought a secret weapon with them, secret person with them, right? And his name we know is Goliath. And so I want us to start just in chapter 17, at verse 23. It says, as he was talking with them, Goliath the Philistine champion from Gath, stepped out from his lines and shouted his usual defiance, and David heard it. Whenever the Israelites saw the man, they all fled from him in great fear. The Israelites were afraid of this warrior. And so what happened is we see sometimes in ancient warfare, they'll do this thing. Instead of spilling all of the blood at the same time, they'll do this thing that's kind of like a one-on-one combat deal where you send your greatest warrior, we'll send our greatest warrior, and we'll have them duke it out. And then whoever wins, right? Whoever defeats the other guy, you become our subjects. But if you defeat us, we become your subjects. I'm glad we don't fight like that, because usually who this usually was, their greatest warrior was usually their king, right? They're the leader of their nation. Aren't you glad we don't fight like that anymore? Whew, that could be rough, right? Imagine our nation's leaders going to fight the other, right? That could be scary. But now, this is how it was. In this ancient world, they would send their greatest warriors, or the leaders of their army, to fight each other in this one-on-one combat. And so, Israelites, who was their greatest warrior? Well, he stood head and shoulders above all the rest, right? He was their king. He was their warrior. His name was Saul, but Saul was hanging out in his tent. He wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. Kind of some foreshadowing. We see David in a similar predicament a little while down the road, right? When he becomes king. But as David hears Goliath taunting these soldiers and not only taunting them, making fun of and belittling their God, right? Because what those people thought at that time, what those warriors would think is, when we're on the field, when our leader's on the field, our gods are with him. And so it's as if our gods are fighting each other as well. And this isn't just a war of flesh, this is war of the gods as well. And so your invisible God is fighting all of our gods while we send this guy out here to defeat you. And they're scared. The Israelites are scared. The giant Goliath, some say that he was 9'9". The Septuagint and some other ancient documents say that he was, they kind of pull it down to like 6'9", which that's a little shorter, but the average Israelite was about 5'3". So either way, 6'9", 9'9", big difference in height, right? God didn't give me a whole lot of height. Pastor Nate's blessed in that way, but I was not. And so I know what it's like to look up to people, literally, right? I know what it's like. And so as a person who's just a few inches taller than that average Israel height, 5'3", I would be pretty tall as an Israelite. Just saying. It's a weird flex, but the Israelites, if you looking at this 6'9" gigantic man who has this armor, right? It goes into specific details. It talks about his armor and he's just shouting all these things at them and making fun of them and their God. And they're scared. They're scared, and not only their scaredness, right? Their fear caused them to be completely frozen. Completely frozen. This very large guy, right? And this giant called, a lot of times you think about with the children's books, it's like, oh, he's like a fairy tale giant. 5 foot. No, just a really tall guy, right? Really, 6'9", that's pretty tall. He'd be a great basketball player nowadays. But when you put him against these, right, even their tallest guys, it doesn't match. And so their fear immobilizes them. Sometimes, I'm just going to relate this to our calling quickly. You're called to do something, and you get into it, and you realize it's not what you expected, and it's a little different. It's not exactly how you thought it was going to be, and then maybe like the Israelites, you start to fear the things that are in your way, and your fear, your intimidation, results in immobilization. See, sometimes intimidation can lead to immobilization. Sometimes fear can lead us into being in this frozen state of, I don't want to move. I'm not going to move. And so this is where the Israelites were. Maybe this is where you are today. When it comes to your calling, there are probably a few different places you could be, and a few different maybe people you could be in this story. But as we move along the story, they find, David sees these guys, and he sees that they're all scared. He goes in to bring them supplies. He forgets all about it and throws his supplies and says, well, what's going on here? And the guys are just shaking in their boots. But then there's David, little shepherd David. And he says, this guy's making fun of our God. Who does he think he is? I'll fight him, right? I'll do it. I can't imagine, right? I'll do it. You're supposed to send your biggest, tallest, strongest king of a warrior. Shepherd David says, I'll do it. And so, moving on to the story, David says, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. Because this is when Saul says, well, you don't even have experience in fighting. You're a shepherd. What do you know about defeating this tall Philistine giant? What do you know about this? And he says, well, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. This is verse 34. When a lion or a bear came and carried off the sheep of the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and the bear. the uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them because he has defied the armies of the living God. It's interesting when he says, remember, this Israelite God did not have a name. They had they said Yahweh. They took it was. They didn't call him things. And so when David says, you have defied the enemies or the armies of the living God, he's naming God. My God is living. My God is alive. Goliath may be out there with his gods, but they're dead. They're not real. We have a living God. Our God is alive and active, and his word is sharper than a two-edged sword. And so David says, I'm not scared because my God is the living God, and he is making fun of our God. We have to do something about it. Your calling usually comes when you realize there's something wrong with the world and it needs to stop. You realize that there's injustice in the world. There's something going on in your community that you can no longer take. It makes you sick. It makes you ready to be, I can't do it anymore. I have to do something about it because it's almost as if I'm turning my back on God if I didn't. And so David feels this. And he also, so then what does he do? He kind of talks about what he's done before. Notice David points to his extensive experience conquering beasts that were far bigger and more ferocious than Goliath. Yeah, he's 6'9", but you guys ever seen a lion? I don't know. I would rather, that's a weird question. I don't know. Nate's not here. We can talk about whatever we want, right? Would you rather fight a 6'9" dude or would you rather fight a lion? I'm going for the 6'9" dude because, I don't know, his teeth are less sharp, right? He doesn't actually want to eat me. So I'm going for the 6'9" guy every time. And so he says, so David's pointing to this experience. He even highlights some of the specific techniques he uses. So when David entered the battle ring, he knew what he was doing. A lot of times we paint this story as if this little David says, oh, well, I'll fight him. And, I got this sling. Is that okay? And, well, let me try it. And it's this little humble, lowly thing. But actually, David knew what he was doing. David had fought before. He had defeated enemies before. He had protected his sheep before. See, there's this underlying theme of David because the priestly line, if you read Samuel, you should read Samuel if you haven't already. The priestly line was going bad and wicked. And so God says, we're starting a whole new thing. And so through this, David is not only supposed to be the king, he's supposed to be a priest. He's supposed to be able to call out and rebuke and turn people towards God. Make sure Israelites are turning towards God. And so in his kingliness, he's also a priest. And so his words are priestly here, the prophetic here. When he calls God the living God, when he says, when he talks about what he's done in the battle, he was confident. It was not his faith, but his skills and expertise that would allow him to take the giant. His faith in God is what brought in on the calling in the first place. And he used his skills to get it done. In fact, fighters in that time period used the sling system regularly. I tried to find one, but I don't know anybody that has a sling that looks like this. Suggests this effectiveness and the effectiveness in the hands of a trained marksman. Actually, it's an accomplished warrior could sling a stone around 100 to 150 miles per hour. Imagine that. And when we think of these stones, we think, oh, there's this little pebble. It's a flat one. I'll take that. But these things were huge. They were actually the size of like a pool ball, and they're a little bit flatter, or like a tennis ball. Imagine getting a pool ball thrown at you at 150 miles an hour, right? Ouch. Not going to go well. It's almost like getting, right, because they didn't have those at the time, but it's almost like getting shot in the head, right? Because you're getting this sling thrown at you so fast and so hard. David did that. That's how he defeated these other people. That's how he defeated the bear. It's how he defeated the lion. And so, actually, excavators have seen hundreds of these sling stones and the slings. And so they know that this was an actual weapon used for war. Now, it wasn't the weapon that they were using in this battle because, right, Saul tried to give him his armor, right? Because he said, Goliath's fighting with armor and sword, and you guys are going to have to brawl it out. But David's like, well, I don't have experience in that, and I'm going to look dumb in that because it's really heavy and you're way bigger than me. So how about I do what I know what I'm good at? How about I do what I know what I'm good at? And Samuel chooses the shepherd to be the king, no coincidence. And then Saul tries to let him wear his armor, but his armor didn't fit because shepherds don't need armor. He's a shepherd. He's not in the army. He doesn't need armor. He's a shepherd. What does a shepherd need? What he's always used. Because sometimes callings often align with natural giftings. Sometimes our callings often align with our natural giftings and our experiences. If you're wanting to know how to do what this thing is that God's called you to do, maybe lean into what you're good at, what you're experienced in, what comes natural to you, what you've spent a long time doing or getting good at. And so David didn't go into this thing so much, when you think about it in these terms, as an underdog as much as just a different type of fighter. Because Goliath was fighting one way, Saul was trying to beat him that same way, but David realized this isn't just a battle between two men. This is a battle between our living God and these people who are trying to blaspheme his name. And so David came at it in a different way, a different angle. And so this story moves on, and in verse 45 it says that this is this famous speech. So it takes like 40 verses for them to actually start fighting. There's a lot. It's a lot. And so the scene is set, and you see Goliath sees David for the first time, and he's not impressed, right? Not impressed. And David, he has this monologue in verse 45, and he says, "You come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but differently, right? I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." Ooh. Then he says, this day, he's calling a shot. He says, this day, the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistines' army to the birds and the wild animals. Yuck. And the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. This isn't just about winning a battle. Do you see that for David? It's not just about beating the bad guy. There's something bigger going on here. He says, this very day, God will hand you over to me. And then he says, all those who gathered here will know that this is not by sword or by spear that the Lord saves. For it is the Lord's, the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands. As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward him. He's faster. Right? He's littler, but usually littler means faster. He ran quickly towards him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground. David used his experience, knowing he was called by God, knowing his job is to point people towards God. He was a man after God's own heart. Knowing that it's his job not to defend God, because God doesn't need defending. He can take care of himself. He's a pretty big boy, right? But his job was to make sure that everyone knew who the living God was. Not the Philistine God, right? Not these other gods. The God of my people is the living God, the true God. And so David, in this priestly way, is saying, when I do this, it's not going to be, go David, you're the man. No, it's going to be God is going to get all the glory because the battle belongs to the Lord. And so the victory belongs to the Lord as well. And so when this happens, it hasn't even happened yet. He's calling a shot. When this happens, everyone is going to see who God really is. Imagine a world, imagine a life where your calling and your deeds and everything you did was so that you could point people to who God really is. Right? Not just so that you look good or you get the promotion or the church grows or you know whatever. It's what if everything you did was so that God receives the glory? People can look at whatever it was or look at your life or look at that deed and say, that couldn't be done by you. There has to be something more. And then you can say, yeah, the battle belonged to the Lord. And so we move on. This one-on-one combat, I'm not going to read the rest. It gets kind of yucky, and I don't know if you guys stream, but it could be cut off the stream. I don't know. We get talking about cutting people's heads off. Ooh. But he then he does. He chops the head off, and it's just a wild. It is that the wild thing where Goliath went from laughing and saying, "You're never going to defeat me," to down on the ground, right? And so. A very well-respected Old Testament theologian, Walter Brueggemann, kind of sums this up in this way, and I really like this. He says, the purpose of David's victory is not simply to save Israel or defeat the Philistines. The purpose is the glorification of Yahweh in the eyes of the world. The intent of the encounter is to make clear yet again that Yahweh saves, not with the conventions of warfare, of human warfare, but in Yahweh's own inscrutable ways. They're trying to get him to fight with the armor and the swords, and God wanted the battle to be won in a different way. A way that was more natural to his calling and his giftings and his experience. Do you see where I'm going here? You tracking with me still? If not, I'll be gone soon. It's just pretend, smile and nod, yeah. But hopefully you can see what's going on here. The purpose of David's victory was not just to beat the bad guy. It wasn't just to face the giant. It was to point everyone to who God is. David's speech here isn't just it's not just a random filler. The author put this in here so that people could see this priestly speech. He's calling it, not only is he calling the nation of the Philistines to a fresh faith, he's calling these Israelites who were shaking in their boots and afraid and immobilized and saying, hey, do you remember the God that we serve? Do you remember how he's brought you through before? Do you remember? Do you see what he just did here? Why are you afraid? He's calling them, he's not just calling the non-believers, he's calling the believers to action. Man, there's so many Christians that are afraid in today's world. So many Christians that are immobilized by their fear, and they're intimidated to actually live out the calling that God has called them to. And I want to ask you today, what would you do? What would you accomplish? What would you say yes to? What would you go ahead and start right now if you knew that God was with you and you wouldn't fail? What would you do? And so we see this story, and a lot of times this story again is taught this way, as I was at least in my Sunday school and Heresy Church. Just kidding. But a lot of times you see this story told as like, okay, now who's your Goliath because you're David, right? And so like you're David, your Goliath is the financial issue you have, or the mean boss you have, or the sport that you have to win. And that's a fine way to see it. That's okay. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I think there's more to it than that. So much more to it than that. Because, as I told you, David is not just a king, he's a priest. He's a shepherd, he's a king, he's a priest. You know who else is a shepherd, a king, and a priest? The good shepherd. The high priest of high priests. The King of kings, the Lord of lords. His name is Jesus. Amen? Jesus, so in this story, you can't get around this story without seeing Jesus all over it. You can't see this story without seeing what Jesus is doing and what he has already done for us through it. Us immobilized and intimidated by our fear while we were still in our sin, Jesus steps on the scene and fights the battle that we should have been fighting and wins, and then we reap the benefits of the victory of Jesus. You did nothing to receive. You did nothing to earn or deserve. You did nothing for Jesus to do what he did for you, and he did it to make his name great, right? To make God's name great. And so in this story, I want to challenge your thinking, and I also want to offend you a little bit. I'm sorry. Again, I'm leaving soon, so it's okay. I can offend you. If you don't like me, just... But hey, I'm going to call you to think about this differently. What if you're not David? What if you are not David? I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to make it more clear. You are not David. You're not David, and you're not a giant slayer, right? You don't have to do that. You don't have to be David because Jesus is David, the root of David, right? Out of the son of the, you read all that boring genealogy in the Bible, and you see that's actually interesting because it's pointing to Jesus. And this story is pointing to Jesus. In this story, David is Jesus. Jesus is David. And in our own suffering and bondage and fear and immobilization, in steps somebody who is not like us, but becomes like us. He's not, David was not a warrior, but he became a warrior. And because nobody else could win this battle, he says, I'm going to do it. But the battle belongs to the Lord. I'm going to defeat the giant. And so the giant of sin and death was defeated by Jesus, the son of David. You see where I'm going with this? Jesus is David in this story. Actually, you read the Old Testament, I'm going to give you a little trick. Try to find Jesus in every Old Testament story you read, because you'll find him. If you don't, keep looking. And so Jesus in this story is David, not you. We always like to put ourselves as the protagonist of the story, right? We're always the winner. We're always we're always the superhero, and the people we disagree with are the bad guys. And we always do that. But when you look at this story, I want you to be challenged by this, that you are not David. And also, not only that, but you are not a giant slayer. You're not a giant slayer. And so a lot of times I've heard this story and I think, okay, well, I got to have enough faith to face my giant and beat it. And that's great. See, David had faith. He had a lot of faith. He had a lot of faith. He had so much faith in God that he knew that God was going to win the battle. And so all he had to do was be obedient. All he had to do was step into his calling. And so in this story, Jesus is the giant slayer, not you. And so I want you to tell your battle today that it's not yours to fight, but the Lord will fight your battles for you. Jesus, the son of David, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the good shepherd who laid down his life for his sheep, the high priest. Jesus is going to fight your battles for you. The Israelites, they got to reap the benefits of what David had done without doing anything. They didn't deserve it. Just like we reap those benefits of what Jesus did for us. And so today I want to ask you, who are you in this story? What am I called to do, really? What am I called to do? What your calling is, actually, I'm gonna give it to you in this way. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. I'm going to read this from the Passion Translation. It's really interesting. It's a kind of a paraphrase translation, but it says it in a way I think can really draw back into the story. Think of the story we just talked about. And I'm going to read this. 2 Corinthians 5, 17 to 19 says, Now, if anyone is enfolded into Christ, he has become an entirely new person. All that is related to the old order has vanished. Behold, everything is fresh and new, and God has made all things new and reconciled us to himself and given us the ministry of reconciling others to God. What's your calling? Read that again. In other words, he's making it more clear for the people in the back, maybe that weren't listening. In other words, it was through the anointed one. Hear this story. You hear this parallel? The anointed one that God was shepherding the world. The good shepherd, son of David, was shepherding the world, not even keeping records of their transgressions. And he has entrusted to us the ministry of opening the door of reconciliation to God. Your job, your calling. What is it really? You are called to join the priestly work of God. You probably never considered yourself a priest before, did you? That word priest, actually Hebrew translation is Cohen. I don't know if anybody knows somebody named Cohen, or if anybody in here is named Cohen, or you have a last name Cohen. That means priest. But what that was is that was God's intention for all of humanity to be priestly figures and living out the will of the Father and doing the good works that he planned in advance for us to do. The job, the role of a priest is to point people to the living God, make his name great, and make sure everyone knows, insiders and outsiders, church people, non-church people, family members, co-workers. Make sure that everyone knows. Make sure you're pointing them all to the priestly work of God. You're called to join the priestly work of God. Now, maybe you're in a season of life. I'm going to have Ashley come up and play something for us as we close. I heard that sigh. No, just kidding. But maybe you're in the season of life that seems unexpected based on the calling that God has already given you. Maybe you signed up for, man, when I decided to follow Jesus, I knew it meant this, but I didn't know it meant that too. I knew it meant loving this person. I didn't know it meant loving that person too. Maybe you feel that there's obstacles in your way, and it's causing you, like the Israelites, because too often in the story, we're not David, we're the Israelites, right? In all of the Old Testament. Maybe it's causing you, like the Israelites, to be intimidated and immobilized by your fear. And you think, man, if I didn't have fear, I would go talk to that person about Jesus. I would go invite that person to church. But I just can't bring myself to do it. Maybe there's another obstacle in your way that's causing your faith to wane. Maybe you've been praying for something, for God to move this seemingly giant thing in your life, the Goliath in your life, and it's not moving. And now you're just stuck, and you're scared, and you're immobilized. Maybe you just feel today that you've really missed the mark when it comes to the calling that God has given you, and you feel like it's too late for me. I missed my chance. I'm too old, too young, not educated enough. I want to encourage you. That God has already won the battle. God has already won the battle. He's already defeated. You don't have to do the slaying of the giant. You don't have to do the fighting. The Lord is fighting for you. And when all you have to do is step out into obedience. All you have to do, I'm going to take what I got. We just sang that song. I know it's not much, but I have nothing else fit for a king except for a heart singing hallelujah, praise God, right? Pointing to God. Take that giant in your life, that thing in your life that is immobilizing you. Take your past experiences, take the talents and gifts that God's given you, and take your faith, like David, that God is going to do something great here, and just throw all that at it and see what happens. I know it's not much, but I'm going to take what I got, and I'm going to take that step towards the giant. So I said you're called to join the priestly work of God. That's kind of a strange spiritual, mysterious kind of thing to say. I think more plainly, at least around here, from what I've heard and seen and read, maybe a better way to say it for all of you folks here in Grace Church is that you're called to love well. You are called to love well, because perfect love casts out all fear, right? God has given you a spirit, not of fear, but of sound mind, right? You're called to love others well and inspire others to love well. God is love. That's what we can name our God, right? The living God is love. And when we love people well, they see him through us. You're called to join in that work. You don't have to create some new thing. You don't have to have all these abilities and talent. You just have to take that step based off of what you've already done, already have. Say, God, I'm going to take that step out and I'm going to do it. And that's what God is calling you to do. Anyone who is enfolded in Christ is an entirely new person. It was through the anointed one, Jesus, Son of David, that God was shepherding the world. He loved us so much. And he entrusted to us. He entrusted this ministry to us, the ministry of loving well. That's the priestly work to which you are called. So I'm going to pray for us today. I don't know how you usually do things around here. I don't know if you do altar calls. It looks like you have some. I don't know if you sit in your seats and pray, or however you want to respond. I'm going to pray for us. And while I'm praying, if you feel led to step out and pray, do it. If you feel led to sit at your seat and pray, if you feel led to do whatever God is calling you to do it. We're in a series about calling, so do it. So I'm going to pray for us, and I want you to be encouraged today through this story of this giant of faith, right? David became that person everybody looks up to and became the king, and he became what God was calling him to become, but he also stepped out in faith very early on, before he saw the crown, right? Before he was named, before he actually put that crown on his head, he was following the way of God, the priestly work of reconciling others to God. And in this story, you see him doing that. And so I want you to think, how is God calling me to do that right now, where I'm at, in my job, in my home, in my church, in my community? I am called, and I'm called to join into this priestly work of God, which is loving well. What am I supposed to do, God? I'm ready to step out into faith. And so if you feel like you need to come pray about that, do that while I'm praying. If you feel like you need to just write something down or take some notes or pray at your seat, do that as well. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful that you don't need us, but you want us. You don't need us to slay giants, but you want us to point to the one who does. You don't need us to fight battles against enemies. You just need us to step out in faith and point to the one who does. And Father, today, if there's somebody in this room who's feeling discouraged in what you've called them to do, who's feeling confused in what you've called them to do, who's feeling like they don't even know what you're calling them to do, God, I pray that you would help them to remember how David did it, how your son Jesus did it. God, help us to use our experiences. Help us to use what you've put in front of us already, the people you've put around us. We don't have to get to a certain place to be able to pursue our calling. We don't have to have a certain amount of money. We don't have to be a certain age. God, help us just to use our talents and our gifts, our natural giftings, our experiences. Help us to give that to you so that you can use it, because that's what it's all about. And today, God, if there's somebody in this room who seems like they're fighting a battle all by themselves and it just keeps going the same way and they feel immobilized in the battle, I pray today that you would breathe life back into them and encourage them, that it is not theirs to fight, that you have already won the battle. Jesus, our good shepherd, our King of Kings, has already won the battle. And God, help us to just lean in to that, and help us, everything we say, everything we do, to not be about ourselves, not be about success, not be about whatever else, but about pointing other people to you in the ministry of reconciling others to God, the ministry of loving well. God, help us. Give us wisdom to know what to do with what we've heard today. And give us courage to live it out. Father, as we go, I pray that you would bless these people, bless this congregation, bless their pastor, bless their leaders, bless their board members. Give them courage. Give them the courage that we see in this story to say there's no battle too big. And there's nothing that our God cannot do. God, bless this church to be a blessing to their community. God, I pray that you would help. I pray that you would help them in every way that they need help, God, even the ways they don't realize. I pray that you would give them exactly what they need, even though they don't know that they need it. And I pray today that things would be done through these people and through this church, that people would look around and say, there's no other way to describe it except that there is a living God and he's with them. God, help this place to be a place that points others to you, and allow us to join in the ministry of reconciling others to you. Help us to love well. We pray these things in your name. Amen. Well, thank you guys for being here today and for listening. Go in peace today.